Hey everyone. Sorry to startle a few of you. So if you had snap up, whoa, who's this guy? I am Sean Oster. I'm a principal program manager lead on the controls team. What that really means is I have a group of minions that run around trying to make sure all our UX is perfect, make sure that every pixel is perfect. I make sure our guys take screenshots of different controls and overlay them. And if they're off by a few pixels, I'm like, back to the drawing board. I'll see you in the morning while you continue to work. That's the joy of being a lead, right? But all joking aside, I actually do love every pixel in an application. It's super important to me that your applications look good, they look clean, because that's the very first thing someone sees when they see your application. Like, is it beautiful? Does it speak to them? Even if they say they don't care about UI, something at a subconscious level does. So this whole talk, I'm going to talk about UI, what we did to try to make it an attractive UI, try to make it standard and make it flow with everything else. And talk about also how it relates with convergence. So as we took the phone XAML and took Windows XAML and brought them together to make one Windows, one XAML, what considerations we made and what considerations you'll have to make in your own applications as you're creating new universal apps. And before I go on, who here is an existing phone developer that's never developed a Windows Store app? Okay, I'm going to try to throw out pro tips for you guys saying, hey, you've done a lot of Silverlight. Here's sort of a gotcha when you move into a universal app, into the new XAML app. So who here also has come from Tim Hewer's talk about XAML overview? Okay, so not a ton. So about half my content seems like overlap with his, mostly because I want to make sure I cover all the controls in the UI, but I'm going to go through it very quickly, because I want to get right to the really fun stuff, which is the code. So anything I skip over really fast, you're like, I wonder what he was talking about, you can either go back to Tim's talk or come up to me afterwards. So step one, we're going to talk about convergence, because that's what we've been hearing about all of build. Then I'm going to dive right into the UI and talk about the intricacies and the differences between the platforms and see what is platform appropriate, what you have to tailor. And of course, my favorite part of any conference is actually talking to you guys and getting the QA. And these are the gantry cranes you can see outside my window, by the way, in Seattle. They're building stuff. So what's convergence mean from a UI perspective? So what it really means is that you have the exact same XAML for your button or for your hyperlink or for whatever piece of XAML it is, and it just works. There's not different namespaces. There's not some kludgy hack. There's not some black magic to try to make it all work. It's the exact same XAML. So things like buttons and checkboxes and sliders and progress bar, they work exactly the same between Windows and a Windows Phone app. You get on the same page, works perfect. Next, we have what I call our optimized controls. These are controls that we've purposely adapted the UX to fit the platform they're running on. If you have a small form factor like a phone, you can use a full screen. You might want to have bigger touch targets so your finger can hit down on a control easier with a thumb while you're walking down the street drinking your coffee. Whereas on a tablet, maybe it's a little more stable, you have more screen real estate, so you have a different UI that you want to show, but you still want the exact same API, exact same way of using the control. Next comes the really fun part, what I sort of call the signature experience. Signature for us and that they're signature controls, and also signature for you because you have an app that's going to run on a tablet and a phone, and you want to maximize that space. And these numbers, these are sort of fluffy designer numbers you see here. We think about 80 to 90% of your XAML will be the exact same between apps, and 20 to 10% will be custom. And not because the controls couldn't do it, but we didn't want to guess what your design was. If there's designers here or people that work with designers, you know that you give them more pixels, and it doesn't look like just the same layout made bigger. Suddenly like, oh, wow, I have all this great real estate I can play with. I'm going to add a drop shadow here. I'm going to have these things swoop in. You're like, whoa, 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 whoa. Slow down a little bit. But that's OK. You want different UI on different platforms when you have a signature experience. And what's a good example of that and why? Well, there's a golf app that we're going to be showing today that we'll walk through. It's going to be my sort of demo fodder. And this is it on a tablet and moving the exact same XAML over to phone. As you can see, it's not the most useful on phone. It runs. It'll work just fine, but it's no longer useful. So the 20% of when you have to customize your UI, it's when you do it on purpose, and you want to bring something like a more targeted UI to the form factor. So what is this Golf Link app? Let me give you a little show of it, so show you what we're going to be playing with. Let's actually start a fresh instance. So we worked with our design studio, and they came up with this cool little golf app. One of my minions, Rohan there, coded it up. So we'll be critiquing his code as well while we go through this. Feel free to just shout out at him. And it's just a basic app. You can scroll through. That's me drinking coffee, not whiskey, as someone asked me earlier. Come through. There's just a basic list. Oh, that is not going to help you. Let's see this. How's that? And that. All right. So let's go right back to the beginning. There we go. So as you can see, it's just sort of a big hub app. There's me with the coffee. Some random images. We have a list over here. Then we come on over. Whoop, lost the scroll bar. And an image gallery, and then sort of a section. Sort of classic tablet type of app. Next, here's how it will look on phone. I will bring that over. Let's close that. Close that. Run the golf link. Same app, but redesigned for phone. Same content, same assets we're reusing, but again, made form factor appropriate. List. And as you can see, this is the same image gallery, but it's no longer super wide. It's only one section wide. So that's one of those type of considerations you have to make when you're designing UI between phone and tablet. And this scrolls vertically, whereas the other one was a big horizontal scrolling. But the same type of status page here, place where you can start a golf round, things of that nature. So that's sort of the app we're going to use as a showcase to show some of the different features and some of the different code techniques to make these things work. So right next door is a great talk being put on by Peter Tor. It's all about the fact that in Silverlight, you had a nice UI bounding box. It was 480 by 800. You only had to design for 480 by 800, and you didn't have to worry beyond it. Now in XAML, you can actually address more pixels if the screen is actually bigger. This is an hour-long topic because Peter Tor is doing a topic on it right now. I definitely suggest you go look at it if you're concerned about how are we going to relay out things in this new world of having different screen sizes. A few little tips I can give you, though. Apps no longer bounded at 480 by 800. I can go anywhere from 384 on upwards. Pixel values are now smaller. What used to be 10 pixels before on the screen, on a 480 or say a medium-sized device, will now measure out at 8 pixels. So any place you had a number before and you're porting, say, an existing Silverlight app, those pixel values will shrink. It's a little confusing. Definitely recommend watching Peter Tor's talk. Before, you only had 3 scale factors you had to worry about. 1, 1.5, 1.6. Now there's a whole range of them. And last, if you're using any type of layout that's absolute-based, say absolute widths, that were absolute to 480 of the screen width, that's no longer recommended practice because you'll start clipping when you're on a larger device. So start using relative layouts in your UI. Star percentage grids, stack panels, put a scroll viewer and things. For when you have a smaller screen, you want to be able to scroll to different content. So now we're going to get to the fun part. What about actual controls? I'm going to talk about a few UI-specific platform features. Theming. Who here did theming in a Silverlight phone app? It's now built into the platform. Before, you had to go grab Jeff Wilcox's theme manager, or you had to roll your own. Now you can just, at an application or page or control level, force it to use either dark or light theme. One line of XAML. So that's a huge improvement. It's a great thing to look for and when you want to hard-code your apps. Accent color. It used to be exposed with a phone accent brush. It still is, but it's actually backed by a theme resource called, and this is a mouthful, System Color Control Accent Color. So that works both on Windows and Windows Phone. On Windows, it gives you back a blueberry color. On phone, it gives you whatever the user accent color is. And you can specify, like I say, light and dark from different pages. Also, another improvement over like a Silverlight phone app is if you are in the middle of your app, you go to the control panel, you change your theme, and you come back to your app will automatically reflect the new theme. Before, you had to tell the user to close the app down and reopen it. I'm going to briefly touch on this. This is more from just when you're thinking about your UI, thinking how to make it beautiful. Take topography into account. Take into it, the different spacing, the different way you line up text with other elements on the screen. As you can see in the screenshot, we have the P aligned up with the big gray box on pivot. So that way, they're visually aligned to each other. And there's a bunch of new properties that actually are in Windows and Windows Phone that help you align these things. For this one, there's optical alignment for text. They'll actually make your text line up on a pixel boundary versus the bounding box around the text. If you know anything about fonts, if you look at it like a letter, there's actually a box around it with padding on the left and right. But if you visually want to match up the pixels, you have to use something like optical margin alignment to scoot it over. There's a bunch of text properties. I believe Tim Hewer covered those, so I won't repeat it here. Another thing that's built into the controls and built into the platform in general, on the phone side at least, is if you go into your control panel and you set text enlargement and you turn it on, and you use a little slider to say between 1 and some other, an N value, controls and text in your application will automatically adjust to it. So if you're writing an app, say for a government or healthcare, and it has an accessibility requirement to support large text, that's already built into the controls. You don't have to do anything. It'll just magically get bigger. Now, another good thing is it's on a sliding scale. So text that's already fairly small will get much bigger as you go up in the text enlargement. Text that's already fairly large, like your headers and your hub header sections, those will pretty much stay the exact same size. So this way you're not blindly sort of rescaling the entire application. You want to do it in a sort of intelligent way. You can opt out of it. That's always the next question is, what if I don't want them touching my pixels? You can opt out of it. So I'm briefly going to touch on system tray. There's still a system tray, obviously. It's that little thing that's at the top of your app. For existing phone developers, you can no longer access it via XAML. Before you could go into your page and you could access it there. You can't. And I'll show you where you can when we get to the code. But just a little gotcha, a little pro tip. Command bar. Command bar is the new converged control between Windows and Windows Phone. You don't specify things in terms of menu items or app bar buttons. You specify things in terms of primary commands and secondary commands. Your primary commands on phone, I'll show you a little example. Primary commands, secondary commands. So you have edit, favorite, and play is primary, and then help is a secondary. And if you look at the example, on phone, the primaries become app bar buttons, the secondary become menu items. On Windows, the primary go on, actually this screenshot's flipped, but the primary goes on the right, and the secondary goes on the left. There's a limitation here you should know about. If you have more than, I believe, 5 items, then they just will not show up in your list. So in a normal app bar in Windows, you can put whatever you want in there. Arbitrary XAML, 20 buttons if you get bored. For the converged one, to make sure we could fit both the phone UX and the Windows UX, there's a limit of 5. So keep that in mind. Some common features, just real quickly. A lot of our controls, both on Windows and Windows Phone, now have a header property. You don't have to go and measure pixel values to make sure your header is the right font and the right spacing. It's a convenient feature. Placeholder text now exists on a lot of our text boxes and our rich text control. So that way, if you want to put something like full name, and then when they have focus, the full name goes away, and you can type in text. This is a feature we took out of the product in Silverlight 3, and we finally brought back to the product right now. Date picker, time picker, they're still controls. For anyone that used phone, you no longer have to go out to the toolkit to get date picker and time picker. They're actually built into the SDK. And they're a converged API between Windows and Windows Phone. Flyouts. Flyouts were something new in Windows 8.1. They're converged with it. If you have a menu flyout, it works the same between Windows and Windows Phone. Flyouts are sort of lightweight bits of transient UI. So you want a little menu to pop up, that's a flyout. You want sort of a dialog to float over your application without navigating to another screen, that's a flyout. Places where you just put like little pickers or little menu items, flyouts. If you were looking for context menu, which was a phone concept or a Silverlight concept, now go look for the menu flyout. Again, sort of remapping the pointers for Silverlight to XAML. There are some phone-only flyouts. So there's a list picker flyout. So when you tap on which calendar you want to put something in, like this example where it says calendar, messaging, and Microsoft, Outlook, and phone, That's a list picker. Now that can be gotten to from a combo box, but say you don't want the combo box to be the entry point. You want something else, like a big picture of a bunny. When you tap on the bunny, it shows this. You can do that via the list picker flyout. It's also retemplatable. There are date picker and time picker flyouts that you can use independent of the date picker and time picker control, if that makes sense. Date picker control calls a date picker flyout. There's a lot of places where you'll see there's a link that looks nothing like a picker, but when you tap it, it takes you to something where you can select a date. This is how you'll do that. And there's just a generic picker flyout. You want a bit of UI to show up on the screen, put something in it, user interacts with it, and then you want it to just go away without navigating to a new page. There's a generic flyout container. And I'll show you some of this stuff in code. Signature experiences. Hub. Hub has always been sort of the root of our phone experience. The panorama is dead. Long live the hub for those existing phone developers. So don't go looking for panorama. We have tweaked hub a little bit. Text might be a little bit small there, but it's the same control, same type of UX, but font sizes have been reduced to give you more visible area on the phone. On phone, you have parallax, you have sticky headers, you have all the same type of UX you had on phone. It wraps around when you get to the end. On Windows, there's a different experience on that side. It doesn't wrap around. It doesn't parallax the same way. It's background image. But both support what's called a hero image, where if you want one hub section to have a different image than the whole background, that works both on phone and in Windows. And I'll show you some of the intricacies of working with hub in a few seconds when we finally get to the code. And this is just, so one thing I'll also show you is how you handle wide sections in hub. It's a little bit different than how it was in panorama. Pivot. This is an easy control. It's the same control that we had in phone. It's not on Windows. It's just a phone-only control for now, but it's the same exact control that you know from Silverlight. List view. Does anyone want to know where long list selector has gone? Anyone using that control? Well, you've now found it. The long list selector control from Silverlight is now the list view. List view has a lot of the great things that long list selector had, and it has a bunch more things, like built-in reorder mode, built-in multi-select, built-in animations. It has incremental loading, which already has existed in Windows 8 and on for a while now. It has a footer, so if you want to actually create some visual space at the bottom of your control, that's already built in as a feature. It also has the ability to maintain viewport, which is by default. Say you're writing a Twitter application, you get new tweets coming in at the bottom and the top, but you don't want your viewport to move. You make sure this is set to true, and it maintains the viewport so it doesn't shift around as new things are coming in. It's obviously a converged control. I'll show you how to support the different reorder modes. And then I'll show you how to do a jump list, because that's not in the box, and so we'll deep dive into that. Grid view. It's a lovely control. If you want to show something, a bunch of images, use a grid view. On a tablet, on a Windows app, it'll actually scroll horizontally. On a phone app, it'll scroll vertically. That's the only really difference right there. Motion. There's some great motion that's finally built into our platform. Before, you had to go grab the toolkit, or you had to grab some third-party library just to get what you expected to be in the box. And we are sorry it took us so long to finally bring tilt into all our controls, as they should have been all along. So tilt, yes, that's what I did when we finally got the feature in as well. So tilt's in there. The continuum animation for lists is there. The right turn style animations for there. All the page transitions are all there. My lovely coworker, Kunal, right there, is going to talk about animations, I believe, tomorrow? On Friday. He's going to talk about animations and show you how to change them, how to modify them. But the default page animations are baked in by default now. So it's just there finally. Again, so sorry. So that's enough slide time. Let's go actually look at Visual Studio now. I bet you want to see it too. So let's figure out how to do this. Ooh. Actually, I'm going to bump up this font so everyone can see it. How's that? Is that visible, or you want it a little bit higher? A little bigger? Okay, we can do that. That's good, because I can barely see it right there. Viewable-ish. Okay, we can fix that. Okay, we'll try that. See how that goes. So the first thing, as I mentioned, some theming. So I want to show you actually how, how theming works and how you can actually set that. Actually, let's go over to, not that, but this. Actually, one second. I think it's going to work better if we can just duplicate this. All right. So now, let's come up here. Scroll to the right page. There we go. So, requesting a theme, we're forcing this app into dark. You just say requested theme. Simple. Another thing around theming is also the styles. Who here uses a lot of styles in their application? And who here relies upon the built-in phone styles, like phone font size large? Okay, we have a story for you then. I'd like to talk about that. So let's go look at the generic.xaml. So for those that don't know, there's one big file that ships in the SDK. This drives the look and feel of every inbuilt SDK control. When you retemplate a control, it actually reaches into generic.xaml and pulls out that controls template and lets you edit it. So this is sort of our master UX for the file, and it has all the styles and static resources and everything defined. So we are going to grab, let's grab one of the styles here. Push F12, and then that jumps into generic.xaml, which is the system generic.xaml. It has every single style that we're using. From a convergence standpoint, we weren't quite able to converge all the style names. So as you're scrolling through it, on the phone side, you'll see a bunch of things prefixed with phone. These are things that will only work on phone. Now, if you see one that you're using in your phone app and you're making a converge universal app, you can get around this by taking that style, putting it in just the Windows app.xaml, and define the exact same style name, and then you can tweak it as you want. So that way, you can continue to use one style name in your two different projects, in your Windows and your phone app, and you can tweak the values as you want. So it's just important to know that there's some styles that if you use them, they won't magically converge. You'll have to copy them manually over into your Windows app. That's just sort of a little gotcha I want to make sure you guys don't run into. And all the different font styles are down here. We can go into phone, text. Whoa. Even I forget the names. They are in here. They are in here. I won't waste your time looking for them, but they're in a section that says phone font size names. So that's just some theming and styling right there. So now let's talk about hub. There's a few gotchas with hub that I also want you to be aware of. Has anyone played with the hub control at all? So the very first thing, if you haven't played with it, is you can't put controls into it directly. You have to use a data template in each hub section. So does anyone want to shout out what the downside of putting all your controls in a data template is? There's a hidden gotcha. There's the design surface, but yes. No access via code behind. So usually, if you're writing an application, you have an X:" name on your controls. In your code behind, you'll just say like my button dot whatever and access it in code behind. Because it's in a data template and it's instantiated in a different way, you don't have X:" name access to that control. So there's a few ways around this. One is you hook that control's loading event. As it's loading, you grab an instance variable to it, and then you keep that around. You can play with it that way. Two is you just do everything via binding, and then you don't care about the X name because it's there. Three is you can always walk the visual tree and go looking for it yourself. So that's just one of those gotchas that when people use it for the first time, especially if they use Panorama, they get a little confused. So just a pointer for you guys. You can also put in a user control. Yes, that's another option, option number 4. Another thing, if you're trying to set the hub header section, so up here where it says golf link, that's also a template. That's the header template. So if you go looking for how to set it, that's where you do it. And again, something that's sort of different. I talked about hero images. How do you set a hero image? So if we're in this first section here, this image right here is a different image than the whole background image of the entire control. Setting it is fairly easy, fairly self-explanatory. You just go into that specific hub section, and then you set its background to an image. So that's how you have a very specific image right there. And this works both on Windows, obviously in Windows Phone. So another important thing is a lot of times you have an app bar, and the app bar needs to change based on which section in the hub you're in. You want to edit on one hub section, you want to reorder in another, or you don't want one at all in a certain hub section. So how do you detect and know when you should show the app bar and when you shouldn't? So the way you do that is you hook into the sections in view. I'll show you some code. I'll make sure it's large enough. Scrolling down here. Scrolling. So what we've done is we've hooked the sections in view changed event. So this will get called every time the user swipes a hub section. So the first thing we check is make sure there's actually a section in view. It's not null, classic coding. And then we make sure that, again, that there are actual hub sections. And then this is where you can start doing your sort of logic to determine which app bar to show. Here we're grabbing the very first hub section. Because remember, on Windows, you can have 3 hub sections in view at one time. So you don't want to just make sure that a section is in view. You want to make sure it's the first hub section, sort of the primary hub section is in view. So here we're making sure that the very first hub section, called recent, is actually in view. If it is, then we do some tweaks to the app bar. We turn things on and off. That would be your logic. But just some little gotchas to watch out for when you're actually working with the hub. I have a question right there? Yes, you can collapse a hub section. So the last little tip I want to show you with the hub is how do you handle wide sections? Because we no longer have a fixed screen width of 480, how do you make sure it's always a multiple of the screen width? To get around that, we actually wrote this really cool little value converter. We come in here to screen width multiplier. All it does is it takes a value and looks at the bounds of the window and then makes sure it's always in a multiple of a certain size. So we're taking the window bounds, we grab core window, get its bounds, the width. Percentage is a value that we hard-coded into this converter, which is 90%, 0.9. Hub sections should always be 90% of the screen width on phone. And then we just make sure that it locks into one of these multiplied out screen widths. So now that we have this converter, hooking it up is fairly easy. We come over to a section that we want to be double wide, such as the second section. Scroll over here. And the width we just bind to this converter. You say, and this converter parameter here, that tells us we want it to be 2 sections wide. The reason you don't want it to automatically adjust is because if there's not enough content in there for even a single section, you'll pull in the next available hub section, which doesn't match phone UX and gets a little sort of confusing on a smaller device. So this is why it's important when you're working with a phone to make sure you go ahead and set and use something like this. You don't have to use this exact solution, but this has worked out pretty handy. So those are sort of the tricks and tips of Hub that we've learned as we've been playing with it and developed it. Next up is the most fun, which is lists. So we're going to look at some list code. I know everyone's wondering how to do a bunch of this stuff. So the most important thing that we always get asked is, how do I do a jump list? And we always want to build it in the box, but we don't always get a chance to do it. Not sure why it's doing this magical little dance. Well, this is what jump list looks like. So you know, always have a backup. So yes, how do you recreate this and reproduce it? So there's a few steps. So our players page here has one of these jump lists in it. We don't care about the collection views. So the very first thing that we want to do is to get this UI right. As you can notice, sections that are empty have a gray background. Sections that actually have content in it are colored by accent color. So how do you determine that? Where's the logic for that? How do you pull the right color? You don't have to do that. We ship in the box 2 different converters, a background color converter and a foreground color converter. These are defined in the primitives namespace, so make sure when you do your XML namespace that you define it up here so you can actually find it. So step 1, add that XML namespace. Step 2, actually create your different converters right here. Step 3, let's actually go down to where we would use those and look at a template. You can copy and paste this template. You can bring it into your app and you'll have a standard UX. It's pretty simple. It's just a border with some padding. But the key here is we set the background to the background converter. And we set the foreground to the foreground converter to make sure it's the right font size. Oops. And then you just bind the key, whatever key is in your collection. And the way grouping works is the same as it's worked in Windows. There's nothing new here, so there's lots of MSDN articles out there on how to do this. You can grab a bunch of different code on how to do grouping inside a list. But this is what's sort of new for this release here. So that's how you now have sort of the jump list view itself. Next, you're going to want the actual sort of what we call the sticky headers. Let's back this up. So this G here, you see it sort of sticks until the next header comes in and pushes it up. We just call those sticky headers. So how do you get those to actually style correctly? Well, that's another template. It's very similar. Has some background. It's the same type of squares. We hard-code the background and the foreground to the appropriate colors for the platform. And we just have a text block that has the key in it, and it has the right colors. So here's the key. Make sure the foreground is the right color, the right font family, the right font size. And we run all these designed by our design department. So they say this is the correct UX, so you can go ahead and use it in your application with confidence. So now that we have our two data templates, and we have our different converters, let's see how we actually apply that to the list view itself. So let's come on down. So who here knows about semantic zoom? Is this a new concept for anyone? There's a few. So in Silverlight, we actually had a special call out to do jump lists. The way we do jump lists in XAML in Windows is you actually use the control called semantic zoom. Semantic zoom is just 2 different controls, and you can toggle between those 2 different controls. You have a zoomed in view, which is sort of your normal view. And in that, we're going to put our normal list view right here. That's inside the zoomed in view. And then the jump list itself is nothing more than a grid. It's no fancy control. It's just a normal grid view. So that's the zoomed out. So that's what happens when you tap on a header. So semantic zoom has your normal view and your zoomed out view. So it's a normal list view. We gave it a name. We have an item source, just a classic sort of item template here. One important thing on list view for those that haven't used it before, make sure you set is item click enabled. Otherwise, you will not get the click event. Sort of an easy one to make a mistake and miss. But if you don't set that and you hooked up the click event, like, why isn't this never firing? Well, that's why. Another interesting thing about this is the click event, the item click event for a grouped list view automatically triggers the semantic zoom state change. So when you tap on a header, list view says, oh, I bet they probably want to swap between the zoomed in view and the zoomed out view in semantic zoom. So if you're looking for where the click handler code is that handles it, you won't find it because it's automatically built in. Next up, you have your group style. This is the actual sticky header portion. This portion right here. So we just apply a style to it. Hides if empty means if there's no content in that group, you don't want to show that group itself. You don't want to have 5 empty buckets right next to each other. So that's just your list. It's a very simple, basic list. And now let's look at the actual jump list portion of it. Again, it's very simple. We hard-code the background to black because we've hard-coded the theme here to be dark. We gave it a name. Here's the item source. It's the exact same item source that we bound to our list view, but we want just the groups. We don't want all the individual items. You just want the individual groups themselves. Again, this isn't a new concept, so I won't recover it. And then we just give it the item template to make it look like the right grid. And that's all you need to create a jump list. If you first go starting out how to make a jump list, you might sort of wonder where it is, but once you figure it out, you realize it's actually a very easy concept to grasp. And a jump list automatically has the right animation, it has the right reader board look to it, so everything flips around correctly and has the right UX. That said, there is one last little gotcha that I want to point out to you guys. So we'll come over here. So if you have a page, and the page already has a status bar on it, well, a reader board is sort of like a new page, but it doesn't have a status bar, which means you're going to get things jumping on the screen. You'll see a visual shift in your UI. And you want to know how to account for this visual shift in UI. We can show you. So you come into here, and just sort of our constructor, and this is how you access the status bar, by the way. If you're like, how do I access status bar now that it's not available in XAML? You just grab it in View Management, Status Bar. We get the current one for the view. I'll highlight that. And now you have a reference to the status bar. And if you want to get to the status bar's progress indicator, status bar.progress indicator. That's how you can set its text and its progress mode. And if you want to show it, it's show async. Again, if you haven't figured that out, it's show async to actually show it. Same thing for hiding, hide async. But that's not what we care about here. What we care about is if the page does have a status bar, then we want to get its occluded rect. This is how much of the screen the status bar is currently occluding. Because we have to compensate for the fact that the next screen it's going to show will not have a status bar. So you want to sort of recompensate for that. So let's go all the way down here. So we hook into the semantic zoomed view change started. This gets triggered as soon as you're moving between the zoomed in and the zoomed out, or between the zoomed out and zoomed in. By default, we have a 0 new margin. Nothing's changing. If we're not going in, if the zoomed in view is not active, basically if we're moving into the jump list, that's what this code is doing, we take the new top and we subtract out the compensation height that we got during the constructor. Basically the status bar's occluded area. We take that and then we re-lay out the pivot. We update its margins. We keep it the same left margin, same right margin, same bottom margin, but there's a new top. We're basically shifting the pivot to account for the fact that the status bar is going to go away when the reader board comes in. Because the page was originally laid out with a status bar. Now it's going to be laid out without one, and so you want to push it down so it visually looks the same. Again, this is one of those things that might not be intuitive as soon as you start playing with all this. So I want to point it out so you can see, oh, I should probably do this in my own code. Another thing with list view, a lot of stuff around list today, is list has built-in reorder mode and built-in multi-select. On Windows, you actually just sort of do the cross-swipe motion where you press and hold and you swipe down, and then it's already selected. Or you could just press and hold and you start moving it around. On phone, you have to actually put it into that state. You have to create an app bar. In the app bar, you have to add an app bar icon. So we can show you that. So as you can see the screenshot here, there's a little pencil icon. Tapping on the pencil icon will put it into reorder mode. Let's go back up. So when you click on it, we go into reorder mode. We just set it to enabled. And it'll start floating around and make it so you can reorder just fine. And then we swap app bar icons. We go from showing the edit one to showing an accept. Pretty classic. And then when they click accept, then you sort of reverse that whole thing. You disable reorder mode, and you swap out the app bars. Excuse me? So when you go into reorder mode, and unfortunately, this is just, oh, so the question is, once it goes into reorder mode, how do you know you're in reorder mode? So what happens is, and unfortunately it just crashes right now, but what happens is all the items start to subtly float and shift around. So you know when you're in the start screen on your phone, and everything starts to sort of shimmy and move around, list views and grid views will do the exact same thing to let you know, hey, now you can move things and start dragging and dropping them. The same type of concept applies if you want to put a list view into multi-select mode. As soon as you say multi-select mode is enabled, all the items will shift to the right. You'll show little checkboxes that are already there by default. You check them, you hit commit, and then you can do whatever you want with those selected items. So that UX and that behavior is built into list view. So now we move on to flyouts. Let's see if we can get that to show. So a basic flyout is something like a list picker. As you can see, it's going to a different page, and there's items you can choose, and then it dismisses and comes away. One thing to notice is it has the reader board animation, which Kunal will be talking about in his animation talk. But it's just a simple sort of basic thing. I'll show you how to sort of hook one of those up. So we will go back over to the XAML. Let's go to the settings page. Whoa. Okay. You can just collapse that. Scroll down here. So up in our page resources, I've defined a list picker flyout. I gave it a name, basic list picker flyout. I gave it some items to display to whatever you want it to be. Here it's to something in our view model, but it could be any type of items collection that you normally use. And so now we have that. It's sort of sitting out there waiting for us to use it. Jump down into our code. Scroll down. Ignore this for now. We have a new list picker flyout class. We reach into our resource dictionary and we grab it by name. And then we do the classic async await pattern that's all over the platform. And we just say list flyout, show at async. And it will show it in the appropriate place for the content and for the platform. So whether it's phone or Windows, it'll show it in the right place. And it just shows it, and it awaits, and when it comes back, then you can get to the actual item that was selected. So we can go list flyout, and then you can get to the normal type of selected index, selected item, and that references back in your items collection. It's a very easy thing to use. It's a common requested piece of UX that on the toolkit side, we get a lot of people saying, hey, can you tease away the pickers from their entry points? And so it finally is in the platform. So that's a little bit of that dialogue there. Another new control is the autocomplete box. Now this is a phone-only control in XAML. There's an analogous control on the Windows side, which is the search box. The search box is a lot more powerful. It does automatic filtering for you. It does a lot of things for you that the phone side doesn't. The phone one is very lightweight. In fact, it's so lightweight that you have to give it a new items collection, a new item source, every single time you want it to show a different list of hit results. So it's a little bare bones, but it's still fully retemplatable, and you can still retemplate all the different items, and it has the pop-up show up in the correct place. So I'll show you how to use this control, because there are not a lot of examples out there yet. So here's a basic auto-suggest box. We give it a name, and we use that new header feature I was talking about. And that's all we've done. In code behind, we just set up some dummy data that we want to get. It doesn't really matter what it is. We're using days of the week. And then we're hooking to the auto-suggest box text changed event. This gets called every time the user has a key down. So the first thing we do is we want to grab the text that they entered. We trim it so there's no white space. Next, we look at the reason why the text has changed. We do that in the auto-suggestion box text change reason. There's 3 of them. One can be because the user actually selected something out of it. Another could be because they programmatically changed it. Another could be because they just entered text into it in the normal fashion. What we say here is, if they picked something, if they actually selected something, we're done here. We can exit out. So we just return. Also, if there's nothing actually in there, if there is no query for the user, you obviously can't go search for something. So we exit out then. And finally, we actually look at the text that they gave us, and we get a filtered list. So we get this filtered list based on the actual query they entered. If nothing came back, then we automatically show the text no matches. So if there's no results, we just say no matches, and then the user knows there's nothing available. Finally, at the very end of all this, if they've made it through this whole gauntlet of checks, then we actually say, OK, good. There's a bunch of results. Item source, we set that to the filtered list. So you can see it's a little tricky because you're giving a new item source on every key press. There's a lot of power in it, but also it's something to watch out for. If you hook up item source just by default in the XAML, it'll never respond to the actual user entering their data. So that's auto-suggest box. And the last control, which is sort of a phone-only one, which means there aren't a lot of examples out there for Windows already, is the login dialog. So here's day of the week for those that want to see it. As you can see, I get everything with T in there, but you can do whatever criteria you want. You can also customize and retemplate it. As you can see, I have a much more rich experience in this dropdown. And also when I commit, I have a much more rich piece of text here. So there's an example in there showing how to do that. So next thing is the content dialog that we created for the phone. If you want to create a dialog like this, which is very rich, which is very powerful, it's a phone-only control for now, but we are working to make it a converged control to make sure it's available for everything. So you can put arbitrary XAML inside of sort of a flyout. So I have a picker. So what we're going to do is show you how you can hook that up. Let's go back to our settings. Oop. So let's come over here. So when we click, when the user clicks a button for a login dialog, we go in. Oh, wait, it's the wrong one, sorry. Here we go. We new up a new login dialog, and then we show it. So where's login dialog? Come over here. Login dialog descends from content dialog. So for every dialog in your application that you want to create, you just create a descendant control called login dialog or user settings dialog. You can handle whatever the user does in their primary click. Secondary click is for if they say accept, cancel, or yes, no. You can handle those cases however you like. And then here you can style it and use actually the designer to make a dialog look however you like. We have a content dialog like this in the toolkit, but it's sort of a pain to use because it's a little more difficult to visually design. This one you can actually design as a control and then just instantiate it in your code. So using this control is incredibly easy, and you can make very rich dialogues. So that's sort of the tour of the different controls that we have. It's sort of the gotchas and the pain points that you might run into that seem a little different. Let's jump back over to presentation. Go over here. That is a gorilla. And then we have to see if we can find the rest of the presentation. So we covered content dialog, showed you how to use that. We covered auto suggest box, showed you how to use that. A few tips in the last sort of few minutes here. Sharing UI between projects. And that's a common question people ask us all the time. How do you do that? User controls. User controls are great. Create one user control in your shared project, and then drop that both in your Windows and in your phone project. Use the styles that are specific to each one of those projects. Same name, but just different values. You can use the styles to hide things, to collapse things. That way you have the exact same XAML, and you don't have to edit it once. And you can use styles to turn things on and off. You can use Visual State Manager if you want. We found that to be a little more cumbersome, a little more verbose. If anyone's used Visual State Manager, you'll realize that it's a very talkative sort of concept. So we actually like using just styles to turn things on or off. As I mentioned, using styles. So that's sort of the best way we've figured out. You can have two different XAML pages, because that's sort of the part of the process of having a universal app. But you don't want to do things that way. I mean, that's sort of why you probably want to have a universal app, is you're trying to reuse and maximize your XAML. Before I finish, the last question I get every time and all the time is, what about Toolkit? Is there still a Toolkit? Now that you finally brought all the controls from Toolkit into the SDK, is there a life for it? Yes. So there will be a Silverlight 8.1 Toolkit coming out, because there's Silverlight 8.1, so we have to rev that. There also will be a XAML toolkit, which has things that obviously did not make it inside of the SDK. Things like a ratings control, like an expander control, which we don't have in the SDK. Things that the delta between SDK and our old toolkit, those are going to go in the new toolkit. And we're going to work on trying to make those converged as well. So toolkit is not dead. It's still a great playground, a great place for us to put up features as fast as we can for you guys to use and so unblock you in any of your situations. Here's some resources. Tomorrow there's a XAML platform leadership panel that myself and a few others will be on. So if you want to ask us why we did certain things or why we're not doing certain things, or bring us cookies, or however you want to do it, we'd love to see you there. The navigation model, that is a good session to go to. Some things have changed between how Silverlight does it and how the Windows XAML stack does it. So it's an important one to understand those differences, especially with how your pages get cached or don't. Building great apps inside Visual Studio, that's always a good session. Anything with tooling, show you how to use them better. learning how the runtime works. It's always important. And of course, Stefan Wick's performance talk is always an awesome talk. I would never recommend skipping that one. So I believe that is all I have for the controls and for UI. Thank you guys for sticking around. I appreciate it. And now questions for anyone that would like to ask them.
Are there any advantages to sticking with Silverlight in 8.1 more?
So the question is, are there any advantages to sticking to Silverlight 8.1? That's a multifaceted answer. The question is, do you have an existing Silverlight app?
Let's say it's new.
So this is the pros and cons. A Silverlight app, well, for an 8.1, yes, there are. There are certain features that only work in Silverlight 8.1 that don't work in XAML. So when I know, but I'm being honest. Yeah, I wish it was otherwise, but there are certain features that only work in Silverlight 8.1 that don't work the same way or aren't fully realized in the XAML stack.
Anything you can elaborate on?
VoIP. That's the big one that comes to mind. And there's different memory limits and memory caps between Silverlight and Windows XAML. So, yep, you're welcome.
Can you talk about best practices for using user controls and custom controls that can span across both platforms?
Sure. The best practices for user controls and like custom controls is use them. One tricky thing about creating user controls, if you want to bind to them, there's sort of a few tricky steps to make it so your external binding, the binding that sits outside your control, can work with your data model, with your view model, whatever, while still maintaining your internal binding. I will actually put a link on my blog or in this deck that shows a great article on how to do that. Because a lot of people just grab some XAML, make a user control out of it, and then try to bind to it, and it's trying to bind to its internal view model versus the one you're on the external. So that, to me, is the first #1 tip. The second is, like I say, just use them. So.
But would you, for example, if a templated control for a custom control, would you include in the XAML, or inside of that, both the XAML for Windows Phone and for phone and tablet?
Yes. So now remember, even when you're creating a custom control, it's still going to be compiled into 2 different assemblies. So yeah, you definitely have 2 different generic XAMLs at that point.
Thank you.
So you're welcome.
Here, sorry.
Oh yeah, I think you were next in queue.
Yeah, my question was, what happens to blend? It's hardly mentioned and hardly shown around, and it's still the best way to use, for a designer to use the thing without getting into the programming specifics. Also, kind of way more comfortable than Visual Studio to work on templating as well as animations.
So what about Blend?
Yeah.
Blend is still awesome. Blend is the only way I can actually make sense of creating new visual states. And when I want to retemplate a control, it's sort of where I go to first. So yeah, Blend is still definitely a great option and a viable tool. So
Yeah.
I just don't want to introduce too many moving parts in my demo.
Yeah,
So.
I was just a little concerned because it's a great workflow with Blend and Visual Studio separately. The only thing that is that it's not being mentioned anymore, and IntelliSense was dropped in store apps in the last bill, Blend, and then there's some confusion, a lot of confusion, what's happening, sort of.
I would definitely go to the tools talk and present that question to them.
Okay.
So
Thanks.
cool. You're welcome.
Does the app bar now support command binding?
Yes. Does the app bar finally support, you can say the word finally, command binding? Yes, it's
And
now
localization.
fully bindable, it works just like a normal control should. Yeah, that's another one that took us way too long to get. Any other questions? They hear yeah? All right, then now I'm officially done. Everyone have a great conference, and thanks for coming.